her has finally arrived, and maybe she can tell us a little bit about her adventure. But if you guys are like me, it's no novelty to have someone that you're looking forward to seeing get lost on the way here. So, but it's usually just been my kids, Jan. Not older people or adults. I have known Jan for a very long time. We kind of grew up in bookselling, and Jan being at Prairie Lights, and me at Murphy Brookfield Books. Jim was just telling me, Jim Harris, her co-owner for many years, is back there, and he was just telling me that she wasn't there right at the very beginning, although she came in as a customer with her sister frequently, and after about 6 months she was back in town, and that's when, so it's almost from the very beginning. But it's been an honor to see their store blossom in ways that are just amazing, and still are to me. At Prairie Lights has been such a wonderful cultural place in our town. And she's also a very good poet, and I don't know how many of you guys know that about Jan. So we have poets in the audience, as well as a poet speaking. So there are lots of things to talk about, and Jan, please come and do so.
Thank you. Can you guys all hear me? Well, I'm glad to be here, and I'm just going to maybe quickly talk a little bit about the history of Prairie Lights and give you some background in what's going on right now, and then open it up to questions, I think, because I hope that you'll have a lot of questions. So, as Jane was saying, I think, was Murphy Brookfield opened in 1980 or 1979?
September 2nd, 1980.
Well, well, that's what I seem to remember, that very quickly it opened after, in the history of Prairie Lights, because Prairie Lights opened on May 13th of 1978. Jim opened it, and as Jane said, I came in there with my sister, and we lived pretty close by. We lived on Jefferson and Johnson, and Prairie Lights was on Lynn and Washington, so it was like 4 blocks away, and it was great. You could just go in there, and the poetry section was wonderful. And I was already, writing poetry, and I loved it. And when Jim asked me if I wanted to work there, I was afraid that maybe if I wanted to go to graduate school, I was saving money to go to graduate school, I should work in a restaurant. But I don't know. I decided, who cares? And it was before Reagan. You could still live on not much money, and it was wonderful. In fact, some of my absolutely best memories are from that first store, because it was, like 1,000 square feet. It was where Baroncini's is, and Jim and I and Michael Connell, who was a good friend, who worked there for many years, and a fiction writer named Beth Collison that now has a novel, and we would just be there, and it was the same as it is now in terms of the reason it's addictive to work in a bookstore is because something new happens all the time. You cannot predict who's going to come in and what the conversation will lead to, and so it's never dull, and it's great to have been able to have been there all these years, to have been able to have afforded to be there. I think it's a great privilege, and the store did very well early on, and it moved in 1983 to its current location, which is on 15 South Dubuque Street, and it was at first just one level, but in 1990, Jim took over the upstairs, and we started our reading series in 1990, which was for 18 years broadcast on Iowa Public Radio, live from Prairie Lights, and that was a wonderful partnership. And it is, somewhat understandable that understandable that they would have to eventually say it wasn't fair for a public supported institution to give that much attention to one business. But it was a wonderful thing. And in '93 we added the cafe, which is above Mickey's. It's actually not in the Prairie Lights building, and it's famously the building that Grant Wood had a literary salon in the 1930s and brought people like Langston Hughes and Gertrude Stein almost got there. And it was, Robert Frost was there. I mean, it's kind of amazing that in our cafe that those kinds of ghosts hover. And you know, there's obviously there have been problems. There were fears of the chain bookstores encroaching in the 90s, and they sort of didn't. And then Amazon did start, and sadly Bezos came back from space. I know there was hope that he would stay. and that obviously has been a problem, but people recently are having a lot of trouble with some of his policies, and I hear that now since the pandemic and since we've reopened, just over and over again. People call me up from, some woman called yesterday and she said, I'm from Connecticut and I'm not giving any money to that guy while he's up in space. And I said, and she said, and I'm going to be getting a lot of small press poetry, so you'll probably have to order it. And we had it all. And then this woman came in, and this is what I mean by you just don't know what's going to happen. This woman came in, and she was also in the poetry section, and then she said to me, you know, I'm a musician. And after she left, I Googled her, and her name is Susan Werner, and she's truly a musician. I mean, she's got a lot of albums, and she's a beautiful voice. And she wanted to maybe do some kind of thing here next summer. But we were talking, and I showed her some poems. I told her that Richard Thompson, who had bought poetry in Prairie Lights, something I'm very proud of, this musician Richard Thompson, and she said she had toured with him for 2 years. And so we got into this conversation about maybe I could curate poetry that she and other songwriters that she knew could turn into songs. And so this seemed like a pipe dream kind of thing, you know, oh, how great would that be? But she sent me an email today, and she said, I'm meeting with Chuck Swanson at Hampshire, and I want this to happen. So that would be amazing. So anyway, so I don't know really what else to say. We have had great community support, and this, you know, where I am right now, I know you guys have all been great supporters of Prairie Lights for a very long time, and during the pandemic especially, we were very aware of how much Prairie Lights is a part of the community. And when people couldn't come in and they were ordering on the phone, and we were delivering, and we still are actually, we're not going to stop our free local delivery because it really, as it turns out, is not that time consuming or expensive. And we're also going to do curbside pickup because it is sometimes hard to park downtown. But people still love to come in, and they've been really, really, you know, happy. And we reopened like 2.5 months ago almost, or, you know, over 2 months ago. And I thought, well, this constant, you know, wonderful stream of people coming in saying how much they've missed it and will end, but it hasn't. And you know, I don't know what is up with that, but maybe people just started reading more during the pandemic, and I think maybe they have. They've gotten more into the habit of reading again, which is really, especially with their children. I mean, people just come in and bring armloads of books up from the kids department, and the kids love it too, and they missed it themselves, being able to go down there. And I had one in there today, and her mother was like, "You have 10 minutes. We've got to meet somebody." And she was, and the cafe opened again. We're just about to get some art up on the walls. Finally, I'm meeting with an artist tomorrow to talk about that, and we have Jamie's, the deluxe, you know, owner, Jamie Powers, has increased her menu, so there's a lot of savory pastry up there now too, instead of just sweet pastry, which is nice. And I don't know. And the programming obviously is uncertain because we don't know about in-person programming right at this moment. We've done a couple of events at Big Grove that have worked out really well, and we're going to do one at the Chauncey on the 30th with a local novelist named Rachel Yoder that's getting a huge national attention for her novel that went on sale yesterday. And the publishers are still talking about doing Zoom readings this fall rather than sending the authors here. And so we've lined up Amor Tolls, and who wrote The Gentleman in Moscow, has a new book out on the Lincoln Highway. And we're doing a Zoom event with him on November 11th, and we're doing a Zoom event with Alexander McCall Smith, and I think Kathleen was still working, she was given a group of dates that she's still working with. But so we will have some good, and we are keeping the recordings, the visual recordings of the Zoom readings on our website so you could see them, and there have been some really wonderful ones. In fact, we had one with Judy Pollenbaum, who is a graduate of the journalism department, just a couple nights, well, the 14th, so almost a week ago. And she was with Alex Wolf, who Jim had brought, I think, for a book on basketball, but this new book was about his father, who was one of the founders of Pantheon Books. And it was really good. And it's there, and you can watch it. And I think the one with Marilyn Robinson that we did when her last book came out in November, and Sam Chang, the director of the workshop, was moderating it, is excellent. I really recommend watching that one too. In fact, we had people all over the country say that Marilyn did a number of these Zoom readings at places like Yale, and that the one here was the best. And I think it was because she and Sam were just so fluid. The conversation was great. So, I don't know. We really look forward to feeling safe and having events in the store, and I can't imagine, well, I don't know. I hope that there will be some in the store this fall. And if you guys are not on our newsletter, which comes out once a month, just send me your email. Just email me, jan@prairielights.com, jan@prairielights.com, and I'll get you on the list for the newsletter, and you'll get that once a month with all the lists for the readings, and they're on our website too. So, do you got any questions? You want the mic?
Well, let's see. You talked about the literature. I know that you guys sell enormous amounts of fiction, and then poetry, and you mentioned children's books. What would be like fourth after that in terms of popularity and I guess maybe importance? What do you think?
Does this work? Oh no, I think I need that. Well, obviously, we've always sold a lot of, I guess, political science we call domestic issues, things about what's going on politically now. I mean, we've always sold a lot of books from that section, and obviously in the last 4 or 5 years more than ever. And that now overlaps with books on the environment and on Black Lives Matter. The last year, we just couldn't keep those books in stock after May 25th of last year. We just could not keep those books in stock. And the schools bought huge amounts of books for their, they got grants to buy books for the kids. And
they won't be able to teach them.
I have no idea. That's amazing.
What would it take, I'm sorry I'm speaking out of turn here, but what would it take to get someone like Ibrahim Kendi here for Prairie Lights?
Well, in the past, we did have Brian Stevenson in conjunction with the university,
Right,
and that was, and that was phenomenal. And so usually with somebody like that, you do have to partner with somebody.
Oh, okay.
But that would definitely be worth looking into.
future is for independent bookstores given Amazon?
Well, independent bookstores have been really resilient. They're fast on their feet. They make connections with the community. You have to understand, obviously, you have to understand scale, and that's been one of the things about Prairie Lights. It's large, and we want to keep. I mean, it's nice to have the building that size. It's nice to have people be able to come in and just feel like they can get lost there. But I do not believe that independent bookstores will go away, and they just keep figuring out ways to sustain themselves, and they're very important to people and communities.
This is sort of related in terms of your sense of community or independent bookstores, but do you have an idea of how your experience in the pandemic compares to other independent bookstores and how they've navigated this new terrain?
Well, I know that many of them. I don't know of any in the group of the ones that are sort of in the world of Prairie Lights that actually went under during the pandemic. And all of us saw our online sales just explode, which was a hard thing also to figure out, like how to process all those. And people were very patient, and we were, in December, we were like 3 weeks behind. And they weren't getting their books on Christmas, and they didn't care. They just said, we want to get them there. And I feel like we all got payroll protection loans, I think, and that was obviously very helpful. And I know that some of the major ones did GoFundMe campaigns, and I think those were successful. I think that would be hard to do, but I think that they did well when they did do them. And I think that coming out of the pandemic, almost all the bookstores that we see reports from are doing really well. I mean, who knows? It seems to me like it's a bubble, like this kind of like the. I mean, it's almost like it's December both months since we've been open again. It's like really busy. Well, maybe not that busy, but it's busier than a normal summer, and we don't have the Summer Writing Festival here, and we aren't open on Sundays yet because I don't even have enough staff, although soon, that's going to happen really soon, because I've got some great people that want to work there and would only work on Sundays, and so.
Well, first of all, I didn't realize until I was talking with Jim that you were a history major too, and I wonder if we can extrapolate something about that with booksellers being best served with history degrees.
Well, did David Yanowski have a history degree? Did David Yanowski have a history degree?
No.
Nope.
Okay.
Well,
That's very helpful. Well, but I do think in some ways that there's a history of everything, and there's even history of history, and so if you know a wide variety of the literature of any topic, that helps. And I know that just from my own experience, you probably got an amazing education working where you've worked in terms of what has been published, what is being published, what will be published, and trends and people's interests. So, you want to talk about that at all?
sure. That is one well, there's a lot of things to address. One, I agree with you about history. I mean, I love reading history, and I think it bleeds over into a lot of things, and that there's the way that you understand fiction is very different if you can place it historically, even if it isn't quote-unquote historical fiction. And just today, I was talking with our customer, Carl Klaus was there, and he was talking about the Bully Pulpit, the Doris Kearns Goodwin book about Teddy Roosevelt and Taft, and I've not read that. And so I think, okay, I've got to read that. And that happens every day, that I talk to somebody and I have to read what they're reading. And so the stacks.
You always read them all.
Well, I do want to read that, but it's 800 pages. And I read the Louis Manan book this summer, which is about, you know, art and culture during the Cold War, and that was also 800 pages. And so you have to, but I feel like I have to read fiction to keep up with because that's what generally people want recommended to them. But I also feel like trends in publishing, I can feel my age. You know, I mean, it's very hard for me, particularly poetry and fiction, not so much journalism or history. You know, I can read journalism and history that's being written now, but there's a lot of fiction and a lot of poetry that just don't interest me, and do interest people that are in their 30s, 40s, and 50s.
So even the poetry as a poet yourself?
Oh yeah, a lot of the poetry that's being written now. But, yeah, and there's so much of it.
So in our family, we have what we call Paul specials. And we miss Paul. And we would go into the store and we would describe a relative from someplace in the world, personality, interests, what they look like, and Paul would say, oh yes, I know exactly where to find a book for that person. And then we would buy it and wrap it and give it to them for a birthday or Christmas present, and it always worked. So I imagine that people come to you and ask you for suggestions. I wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit about that. What percentage of the people who come in are asking for suggestions for someone for a gift?
Oh, lots. Yeah.
And you can, I mean, and Paul would do this too. He might have convinced you even if he was wrong. And then because you believed it, you could get the person you were giving it to believe it.
You really read that book.
He did read a lot. I do think he read a lot. But yeah, it's really fun. I mean, it's really fun when you feel like you've done it well, and that people come back and they say that they love this, and that's why it's nice to have a big staff. I mean, Tim, you know, Bud, he actually reads a lot, and he reads different things than I read, and he can recommend things. I mean, there are people that love his recommendations and people that love Kathleen's recommendations, and but I do, you know, I think you get a great deal of pleasure out of being able to recommend something that you really like and have the person come back and say they liked it. Yeah.
I can speak loudly. Do you think with COVID that people have changed their reading habits? I mean, you talked about that a little bit, but are there people reading the same things they always read, or are they moving into other forms of literature or writing?
That's an interesting question. One of the books that we sold, and I haven't read, over the pandemic, just tons of copies of, is a book called Braiding Sweetgrass, which I think is about native cultures. And people are really wanting to read a lot of not necessarily horrific books about the environment, but books that sort of give them some kind of hope for the future of the environment. And I think that the pandemic probably kind of played into that some, and science, popular science, but NPR is great for promoting, you know, popular science books, and so I think because the pandemic was an illness, people were interested in reading about that and reading about pandemics of the past. But what I think is that they're just reading more. They had a lot of time to be alone, and a lot of people that were forced to be on Zoom a lot. I wasn't, but there were a lot of people that were, for both, you know, for their jobs and stuff, really are sick of looking at things on screens, and so they like reading.
Well, now that you've said that, you know, you don't understand what the youngsters are reading today, I wonder, how do you sort of find out what people, I mean, it's one thing to sort of, you know, respond, but how do you find out what's the next, what you want to have there? You know, to sort of anticipate, you know, we've got age-wise a really hugely diverse population here, right? A lot of young people with really literary orientations. How do you keep up with all of that?
Well, that's a really good question, and you know, obviously, you can follow. I mean, the publishers give you a lot of hints. Particularly, they tell you what's going to be on, you know, the radio, and they know that way out. And you know, and you read what other writers are saying about the books that are coming out, and we're lucky to have the 20-year-olds, you know, the people in their 20s that are students of the Writers' Workshop that can talk to us, and they do, and that's super helpful, you know, in terms of fiction, I think. And actually, I shouldn't say that I can't read or don't like fiction that's being written, because there's a lot of actually very good fiction, I think, that's being written by people now that are quite young. There's a young man who's named Brandon Taylor that graduated from the workshop, I think, 4 years ago, and his first novel was shortlisted for the Booker Prize. And he's been in Iowa City all through the pandemic, and he's just leaving now, which is kind of very sad for me. And in fact, yesterday I was in the cafe, I was downstairs, and there was this woman, and she was, I would say she was my age, and she was buying, he has a new collection of short stories, and she was buying it. And I said, oh, you're getting Brandon. And I love the short stories. I liked the novel, I love the short stories. And Brandon also wrote 3 short stories in the Prairie Lights Cafe that are going to be, that have been published in magazines, that take place there. I mean, but, so I said to her, I was talking to this woman about the stories, and she was talking to me, and then she started talking about Brandon, and I thought, well, Brandon has never had a job, so she couldn't have been somebody he worked with, and she doesn't have anything to do with the workshop. I would know that. So I just said to her, well, how do you know Brandon? And she said, oh, I've talked to him in the cafe.
Sorry, but I have to tell this one too, because I walked into the cafe one morning and got my coffee, and as I was waiting for it, somebody asked me what I read, and I said, well, I read this short story in New Yorker, just unbelievable. And I started to describe it, go up and down. This young woman sitting 10 feet away looked at me, and she finally said, I wrote that story. and she won a $50,000 prize, and then later the MacArthur grant. And she's come back to read a couple of times.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, Jim's talking about Ian Lee, who grew up in China and came here to study in medical school. It was like biochem or something. It wasn't to be a doctor. And then she took a class with Jim McPherson in the Writers' Workshop, and she's marvelous. I mean, her books are marvelous. And like Jim said, she's had a MacArthur. She's had almost everything. And she spent a huge amount of time in the cafe, but when she was just starting to write.
Yeah, and they're not available in China. Well, I was in China with the bookstores.
Yeah.
I wonder if the two of you might want to comment on region and geography and social history. Because what interests me is, I was an undergraduate here in Weissmiller, and even then there were independent bookstores in Iowa City. But if you go to other centers, so-called centers of learning in this country, I don't think you find the subculture of the bookstores that one does in Iowa City. I know that many places I've lived and worked in that don't have them. And is there something other than the Writer's Workshop, which is obvious, but is there something else going on about Iowa City?
That's a good question. I think it all started as Jen started talking about there's a local book club, and there were all these famous writers who came, and I think it just engendered a whole, I'm sure the right word, notion of a literary culture, and I think, I can't prove it, but I think that was a real good base for it.
But there's something else going on too, and I don't know.
But Jim, what prompted you to start Prairie Life?
One, I just got out of the Army, and at about the same time, I inherited the land from my grandfather's farm, so I had some money. And I've been spending time, I was actually working, I had a regular job, I was working for nothing in the bookstore in Seattle, and I just loved it. So that's what I wanted to do.
And I think Jane, too, would say that there is something about, you know, having more than one bookstore is a good thing. And, they feed each other.
I know, though, that to my mind, Jan is kind of painting a rosier picture than I would of the longevity and strength of independent bookstores. Used bookstores, and then I would also include retail bookstores, have certainly hit the dust a lot in recent years, and I think that's for many reasons. And but I think we all have shared a certain amount of creative thinking in re-envisioning how to do things, like my own business with my husband partner is now online strictly. We closed our very expensive bricks and mortar site, and that's very common. I know you all know that. So you go to other places and it's the same story over and over and over again. But yeah, you know, there's been a lot in Iowa City to foster this literary community that both of them have talked about. And one thing that hasn't been brought up is the small press movement. Starting much earlier, but then culminating in our Center for the Book at the university. The book as an object and its legitimate study was a focus here long before it was a focus anyplace else in the United States. So, and I think in some ways uniquely in the world. So there have been some other things, some other magic stuff going on in the background too. Iowa City is, yeah, hey Bob, hi.
Now I can talk loud. I was in a little
Yeah, I don't, and I don't really know how some small bookstores that, you know, that don't have that kind of presence have made it, and I know that used books have, I mean, because Amazon has just collected all the used books, and you can get them so cheaply there, and, but of course that affects new books too, because you can get a new book used almost immediately.
Right.
I guess my question is to, not just to Jan, but to the people here. Did you ever squirrel away books and think, I'm going to read this in retirement? How has that been going? I have to admit that I'm not doing real well, you know. Does anybody else have anything to say about that? We did have all of this time during the pandemic, and I don't know about everybody else, but I didn't seem capable even of reading anything of substance. It was just kind of like pick up a book and disappear into a story. That's all I wanted. But did anyone else do any kind of serious reading? Oh, come on, you guys. Let's be hopeful. But do you hear people say this all the time, Jan? Oh, I'm going to read this in retirement.
Well, I saw a cartoon the other day where this man is in bed and his wife is moving this giant pile of books from the side of the bed, and he said, "Don't touch that. That's my emotional support pile of books I haven't read yet." I certainly have that, and but it's true though. It is. I mean, you can't have every book in the world in your house.
No.
I don't need that.
Okay.
My question is, are you seeing a change in the demographics of your clients? The younger folks seem to be tied to their Kindle or their laptop or their cell phone or whatever, and the older generation that I am associated with likes to feel the book or feel the newspaper or whatever rather than online. Are you seeing that in your business?
You know, not as, I mean, I can't say for sure, but every day there's young people in there buying books, and even, I mean, very young people. I don't mean high school kids, but I mean, you know, undergraduates buying books to read, and I know they spend a lot of time on their phones, but they seem to buy books too, and I really don't know what to attribute that to. I don't know.
And I have a question about publishing. Amazon makes it possible for people to self-publish.
Yes.
And lots of people, as far as I can see, are self-publishing. Is that having an impact on bookstores, as far as you can see?
Well, the things that people self-publish on Amazon for the most part are things that the audience for is quite small. You know, it's people that know them generally, and but if they bring the books to us and want them to be there on consignment, I always say yes. I always say, you know, they say, if they say I want a reading, then I say, well, after we've sold 25, we can talk about that. And we have had readings from people that have self-published their books, because there are people that just get tired of waiting. You know, there are good writers who self-publish books because they just don't want to deal with the whole, you know, mechanism of Jim.
And a lot of local people who might self-publish, and they've got a community that comes once they're published.
Right. I mean, we've had many readings of people that have self-published their book that have a large community and often, fairly interesting books. But we also have lots of books in there that have been self-published that never sell.
Is the sale of children's books strong? Is it increasing? Is it decreasing?
I would say it's increasing.
And are they being purchased by parents, by grandparents, by...
Both. Oh, definitely both. We have lots of grandparents that buy books, and in fact, they say, I don't have room for books, too many books for myself, but I have lots of my grandchildren. I can buy a lot of books for my grandchildren. And I think children's book publishing is fairly strong right now too. Maybe you would disagree, I don't know. But
Well, is that it?
well, thank you. I'm really glad you guys all came. And I hope if you're not getting our newsletter, you will email me so that I can get you on the list for that. And I do recommend just looking at our website and looking at the videos. You can type in Prairie Lights videos, and then you can see all the Zoom readings we've done. And some of them were really very good. And so I don't know what the future of that is.
We don't, nobody does.
Right. I could have talked about your book, but we'll wait and do that later.